Welcome to another episode of Inspire People, Impact Lives. Today, before we get into today's episode and to our guest, I want to give a quick shout out to our upcoming charity event because it ties in with today's guest. Fashion Forward Catwalk for Charity, a fashion show coming up on October 12th at the Sylvie. It's going to be a tremendous event. We have over 60 models from 10 different clothing lines from around the Madison area that will be strutting their stuff to raise money for the Rape Crisis Center, Clean Lakes Alliance, and Doyen, a women in entrepreneurship charity. 10 of our Northwestern Mutual advisors will be modeling fine line custom attire, suits by our good friend Mitch Bram. It will be a ton of fun. I hope that as many people can buy tickets and get there as soon as possible. Our guest, Tom Farley, will be part of the show, not modeling.
Thank God. Oh, my Lord. That would be...
But helping host and judge, correct?
Yeah, I'm always judging people, but just adding some humor to it. Yeah, in between, the fashion pieces, there's the little gap. So, provide a little color.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So everyone can go to thesylvee, SYLVEE.com/events to get your tickets. Please join us. It'll be a lot of fun on October 12th. So, Tom, Madison native, one of the hosts for the show, adding color commentary. Welcome to my show.
Thank you.
Inspire People, Impact Lives.
Yeah, no, this is a lot of fun. I like this. I like your gig here. This is pretty cool.
Good, thanks. So we're going to be talking about developing culture, but before we jump into that, tell us a bit about yourself for those that may not know you.
Sure. Obviously, born and raised here in Madison, and I went off to college at Georgetown. Followed my father's footsteps to the hilltop in D.C. And mid '80s, it was all finance. So all my friends and roommates at Georgetown that actually studied went up to New York, and I said, okay, I'm going to follow footsteps. And so I just followed the crowd up to New York, and had a career in financial services. Mostly in marketing. I was a marketing major, so I was a marketing director at like Citibank and Bear Stearns and KPMG and a lot of really big financial services companies. A lot of big heavy cultures. So I really got thrown on the fire there as a Midwestern boy, and I think that was kind of fun, adding my little Wisconsin-ness to New York. It worked, and I played it up. So I did that for a long time, and then, in '97, Chris died, and I started to go out into schools, on my own, just kind of talking about Chris and his struggles and things like that. And I got more and more passionate about it, and I built the Chris Farley Foundation brand, and I kind of took all my marketing skills and threw it into the foundation. And before I knew it, I had grown this nationally recognized nonprofit, and it was pretty cool. But then I realized that I was working for a nonprofit in probably one of the most expensive places in the country. So I was kind of struggling with that. And then in 2001, 9/11 hit. And I was like everyone in New York. It's like, is this what my life is going to be? Just like taking a train down to the city and spending 2 hours on a train and not see my kids grow up, and being a Midwestern guy and knowing the values out here, I just packed up the family and said, we're going back to Madison. So in 2003, I came back here and continued with the foundation and going into schools and helping kids on resist drugs and alcohol, and using, because it's Chris Farley Foundation, you got to use humor.
Yeah.
So I found a way to use humor with a very serious subject matter, but I looked at all three of my brothers who are actors and how they connected with people with humor, and one of the tools they used was improv, and we'll get into that. But
yeah.
So that's just kind of been my journey. It's been more kind of going with my my skills in marketing and branding development, and my passions for communication and marketing, and just going where life takes me.
That's awesome. So how old were your kids when you moved back?
My oldest daughter, Mary Kate, was in 7th grade, and Tommy and Emma, my two youngest, were in 4th.
Okay. Seventh grade's a difficult time. I moved in eighth grade, but
yeah, it was tough for Mary Kate coming in from the East Coast, and but she got through it, and she's back out in New York now. She's living in Brooklyn, so but she loves her Wisconsin roots.
So going back to your humor aspect there, obviously brother's hilarious. You've got a great sense of humor. How did that play such a role in you guys growing up with your parents? Were your parents extra serious, maybe, and you guys just all want to be the jokes?
No, not even close. Not even close. So it's interesting. The good and the bad of it is, we used humor literally for everything. There was always humor in the family, and my parents were two totally different. Not totally different in the respect that I describe my father as, he was just this big guy, and he always had this, this booming voice, and he was very intimidating, but he was just so good with people. He would listen, and I describe him as, the light on the back porch door where like every moth just flocks to him. He had this ability to just bring people to him. He could just sit there and people were just like, what's Miss Farley doing? And they'd come up to him, and he always had a great, story, or he listened, and, he was a good conversationalist. My mother, on the other hand, was pure Boston Irish. She's from Boston, and she just, just like my grandfather, they were just crazy. They'll, anything in public, they're they're completely fearless with conversation. They'll strike up a conversation with anyone, and my mom kind of really taught us. My dad gave us that love of humor, and mom gave us that what humor needs, which is taking risks with your humor. So it was a good combination.
That's great.
And plus, being 5 kids, you were always in competition for their attention. So we were always doing. It was just chaotic. It was just crazy.
So you went to Georgetown. Your brothers went to Marquette.
Yep.
And you say your sister went to Edgewood. So all private schools.
Oh yeah, with the exception of Barbara Ann, obviously that's Dominican. All Jesuit. My dad was a big fan of, because Dad went to Georgetown.
Yeah.
So he loved the Jesuits, and Georgetown, Marquette, and my youngest brother Johnny went to Regis out in Colorado.
Okay,
Denver.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So going forward and talking about developing culture, you and I talked about pre-show about mental health and how that, I don't think we can talk about developing culture without making sure we talk about developing or creating systems for mental health. Can you talk about some of your experiences? Obviously, you've talked about the Chris Farley Foundation, but obviously there's something that's not so obvious, and you're working with other people, and neither of us are mental health experts, right. But some of your experiences in working with substance abuse in that field, we talked about pre-show. I want to make sure we cover as well.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of the companies I've worked for in my career, there's obviously a lot of mental health issues in those companies. I'm just kidding. It's for me, doing whatever I do, communication is the key. And so I insert that pill into almost every problem. I used it to help kids resist peer pressure of drugs and alcohol, but also in mental health too. It's getting things. It's being able to talk through things and be able to talk about things. And I mean that's my go-to is communication.
I love it.
So
communication is key in almost everything we do, whether we're talking about mental health, which is a very serious topic, or talking about an also serious topic, but not, could be performance reports or something like that, but not nearly on the same level. The communication is the key and expectations that are had there. So.
It's the first thing to break down, the first thing that isn't working,
So, for those that don't know, Tom is a motivational speaker known for his talks on substance abuse with the Chris Farley Foundation, but also corporate talks on developing culture in the workplace. You brought up improv earlier.
Yeah.
So how are you utilizing improv in those talks?
Well, even when all throughout my career as a marketing director, I was always kind of inserting the tools of improv. I was always going into some skit. No, I wasn't doing that. So improv is it's got one rule. It's called the rule of yes and meaning that whatever somebody says, you say yes to it. Not literally, but you accept it. That means you've listened. You've like, okay, I've heard you. Okay, but the and part of it means you can take it wherever you want to go. So it's this give and take, this yes and, not yes but. It's just okay. Every idea, every thought is a gift that can grow and can be built upon. And so, for instance, like one of my classics is how many times we sat in a meeting around a boardroom, and somebody's sitting at the front, and at the head of the table, and they're going, all right, give me your projections for next month. Let's go around the table, and everyone goes around the table. And what that does is, first of all, everyone, this person might be able to talk a blue streak, but the next person might need to be one of those persons that hears everyone else, and then they're comfortable talking. The next person maybe like to get up and walk around while they're talking. This next person might not need to write something down and get their thought and then talk. But it's always around the table, and you're always trying to figure out what the person at the head of the table wants to hear. So there's two concepts there. I think one of them is everyone's got their own voice and their own style, and you got to find what that is and nurture it. That's why I talk a lot about ensembles versus teams. We've been taught in corporate America that teams are the best thing. You got to be part of a team, be a team player. Who's your team? And that's great to a certain extent, but the problem with the team is there's always somebody that feels like they're the quarterback, and there's always somebody that feels like they're the last kid picked. But an ensemble, everyone's got their own voice and own style. In music, you look at a band, you've got a big brass tuba and a small flute. Two totally different things. One's big and flashy, one's small and not unnoticeable. But if they're both playing to the best of their ability, that song is wonderful. Mm-hmm. And so find out what everyone's voice and talent is, and exploit it, and make sure that they're going to the best of their ability. That's a true ensemble.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I do with groups with using improv is in the idea generation process. When you're sitting around a table, and again, it's always like, well, let's come up with the next advertising plan. What are your ideas? Let's go around the table. There's that again. And then the thing is, somebody could come up with an idea, and you're like, and they'll judge it. And the next person will react to how that was judged. Imagine a different scenario where everyone just says, let's get a list of 20 things that we want to talk about that we think might be good for this advertising campaign. Let's go around the room, just get the list. Our goal is just 20, and we're not going to say anything about it. And then after you get the 20, you look at that list. Then you judge it. You suspend judgment till you have the list. And part of number one, number one might not work altogether, but part of it might work really well with part of number 4. And you create a whole new idea just from parts of 1 and parts of 4 that if you had judged 1 and thrown it out, that idea would never have come.
That's a great ideation.
Yeah. So it's idea generation by suspending judgment. And also, again, going back to that once around the table, no status. Everyone's got the same status. When you're trying to generate ideas, there's no chief. We're all trying to generate an idea.
That's so powerful what you just described there. I've been in a situation where we were in we'll call it a workshop. It was myself and part of my leadership team. And, we did this survey ahead of time that there was a lot of judgment that went into. Part was directed at me as the leader, and then part of it was directed as the team as a whole. But when they unpacked it in the workshop, they unpacked each different topic, and we had to, without sitting in judgment, actually sit there and, or I should say, address the topic without solving the problem.
Yeah.
So like think about the topic as a whole and like list out those 20 things, but they weren't problem solving things. And so we had to sit there for the entire day and just address the problems without solving them, which was incredibly difficult.
And frustrating.
Especially for type A personalities that just
yeah.
want to solve. Is like get to the problem and let's solve this right now. That was incredibly hard, but it was a very effective exercise to the next day to be able to sit on it for maybe not even 24 hours, let's say 12 to 18 hours, and come back with a more clear head and be able to solve the problem going from there.
Yeah, you disassembled the whole car and then came back later with with a better set of instructions how to put it back together again. Yeah.
And do it as a team.
And do it together, right?
Yeah, or an ensemble, I should say.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
So there's a couple things you mentioned in there. You mentioned and versus but, which I love because I've heard the power of and versus the tyranny of or, which is different, a little bit different, but and is so powerful. And one of my business coaches also always told me, you always want to be described with an and versus a but.
Yeah.
So he would refer to he's an NGA or she's an NGA versus an NGB. And what he meant was nice guy or gal and versus nice guy or gal but. And so as you were saying that, I was like thinking through that. I was like, oh, John's voice is ringing in my head again, going through the and versus the but.
It's huge. Yeah.
So where do you find the most power in those and getting people to think about and versus but in improv?
Well, the thing,
or is there a principle behind it?
Well, that one thing that goes along with it, that to do yes and to get people to participate and to really have it, that dynamic work, you need a certain level of trust.
Yeah.
And these exercises. There's these games and exercises that have been built around improv, and the rule of yes and they're all designed to build trust in the ensemble. Once you have, trust that okay, you told me that like you're going to accept my and or my yes, you're going to accept that, but I need to trust that you really will. So that I will say whatever comes out, and so building, it's all steps of building trust. And when you have an ensemble that trusts, you're singing. It's great. It's a great feeling too.
So Jordan did your improv thing, my brother.
Yeah,
and he told me about it, and he explained that concept to me of accepting. I was like, because we all know people in our offices or in our lives. I think so many people listen only to respond.
Totally.
And as you're saying there, the trust that has to be built on the improv, especially if it's on stage in front of a crowd, certainly has to have that trust there to be able to put on a good show, to be entertaining to the crowd, whether it's funny, enlightening, whatever it might be, but accepting and truly listening to what you're saying so that you can riff and create your own spin from there.
Yeah.
But how that can apply to everyone's life on a day-to-day basis is tremendous if you just think about that concept and accepting and truly listening, not to respond, but rather to understand what is being said to you. Yeah,
that's one of the hardest things in a corporate culture, I think, to instill. And I think there's a lot of talk out there but I think one of the things is how do you implement that? How do you instill that culture? And the only thing I've really found that does that is improv. That does that really well. I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to do it, but when you think of corporate retreats and just little things, but improv is one clear way that. It's a tool.
Is it because it levels the playing field?
Right. As I said, there's no status.
Right. Because you think about, you brought up corporate retreats. If I take my leadership team out and we're doing annual planning, and I got that coming up in December, I'm still the leader. They expect me still to lead that meeting. And I still have that title, whether I want and I encourage all participation or not, I still have the title as the managing partner, and they're still expecting me to lead that retreat.
Right, and there's and you can lead the process, and you can and there's certain points where again, when it's idea generation, we're all in, but when it comes to like problem solving and things like that, you have the ultimate decision. So that's everyone knows that.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to build in the right, you have the right tools to make those decisions. But like as I said. Going back to when I started doing this in treatment and recovery, I used to go here to Teens in Recovery, and I used to go to a weekly meeting of all these teens, these high school teens from different high schools in Madison, and they're all in recovery. They all had some either drug or alcohol problem, or they're trying to stay clean and sober. And part of recovery is therapy and talking through it, as we said. So you got a group of teens from different high schools, and guys and girls, different kind of different ages, with 5-year kind of range, and you get them in a group discussion on their recovery, and they go, okay, share. Well, these are kids. There's no kid in the world that's going to trust his peers, and come out. And so I would come in and I'd say, we're going to do a couple improv things, and get them in the context of these storytelling or these fun little games. They're sharing, and to them it's just a game. We're just telling a story, and all of a sudden they're connecting with their people. The ensemble starts to come together, and then after like a half hour, 45 minutes, I'd leave and let the therapist, like, now you can do it. Now you can go to work, because now you've built in trust. Now these people are comfortable, they're sharing, and there you go.
So going into those settings, what was that like? I'm sure you brought some clout to the room just by being Chris's brother.
Totally.
Right? So, and I'm sure everyone at that time knew Chris's story, or at least had assumptions about it. How did that help in bringing those relationships or that trust to the table?
I could have played it two ways. Well, I'll go back to how I really started this. I started going out in Connecticut, where I lived, into these high schools, and I would go into these health classes, and I went with this woman who was going around to schools talking about her son had died of heroin overdose, and she would go in and very emotional, a lot of tears. I get it. It's a mother. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the one group of people I've had a tough time really talking to. I can talk to anybody about losing a sibling, but losing a child is a little beyond me. But so this woman was, very emotional and very like, don't do what my son did. Don't make those mistakes. And very kind of, don't do this kind of stuff. Just say no type stuff. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, I'm Irish. We bury those emotions. I'm not gonna cry. So I knew I had to do something different. That's when I started the improv, and so I would go into. Now I kind of lost my train of thought.
You're going into high schools. You're working with it started with mothers and now developed into improv is where you're going.
Yeah, I just saw kids unable to communicate, but
the question I asked you is, how did being Chris's brother level?
Oh, so I could have done that. I could have gone in and said, thank you. I could have gone in and said, my brother died of an overdose. You don't want to do that. I could have played it like the mom, and say, don't these are the lessons. This is what Chris did. And and walked away, and don't do that. Instead, I chose. I found improv, and I knew I couldn't do that. It didn't feel right. So I studied improv, and took some classes at Second City, like my brothers. And I'm like, okay, I understand this. And so I went in, and I thought at the same time, geez, we've been giving these kids all this information. From DARE programs in 5th grade on up to health classes in high school. Here's the next pamphlet on methamphetamines. Read this. This is the new drug. Stay away from it. But we're not giving them any tools. And for me, communication was that tool. So in one fell swoop, I got to give them a tool, how to communicate better, how to create peer enhanced environments rather than peer pressured environments. And I also gave them humor. We had fun doing it. And when you're talking about kids, if you're not incorporating music or humor, you've lost them, at least half of them. So I had the humor brand down, so it was good. It was kind of great to build that brand, the Chris Farley brand that way.
Just thinking about that. So your brother died when I was a senior in high school, and my brothers and I still quote him in his movies to this day. And that humor piece that he left with us. But also I think about, just made me a little emotional because I was thinking about, as you were saying that, every single person I've lost, I still remember their laugh. Of all the things that you could remember about a person, their smile, whatever it may be. Even to the friend that I lost when I was 16 that died in a car accident right outside my house, I still remember his laugh of everything.
What a legacy that is. Your legacy of laughter. I mean, that's why Chris is so special. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And I have the luxury of being able to see that laugh, played out on TV, like almost every time I turn on the television or something, there's Chris again. So, yeah, you're right. It's
how is that for you? Seeing him on, I mean, it's been a number of years, over 20 years now, but
I'll tell you, it's a blessing, and I'll tell you why. My dad died a year after Chris, and the loss of my father, that is more like everyone else's loss when they lose a loved one. After 6 months, no one asked me about my dad anymore. That grief now is just only mine. And maybe when we talk about it with siblings, but that's really just mine. I keep it to myself. But Chris, there's not a day goes by somebody doesn't ask me about Chris. I get to share stories about Chris and talk about him, and it's kept him, so much, alive than it is. And now Chris doesn't seem like he's been gone 21 years, which he has. Yeah. Dad gone 20 years? Yeah, it seems 30. It seems like a long time. But Chris, I that's a rare blessing that I get. And people can say, come up to me all the time. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm like, I appreciate that, but understand, he's still so much a part of my life. Like he's still my brother.
What's the one thing most people don't know that you think they should know about Chris?
Well, I think they're starting to. I could have said a lot of funny things there. Just what a giving person he was. He was all. Well, first of all, I mean, Chris was Chris. I think Chris is loved now because, what you saw is what you get, and I'll bring this up a little bit later about the Wisconsin DNA, but Chris was Chris, whether he was on stage or just with a bunch of friends. He was always doing funny stuff, and but also he was also somebody of deep faith. He would go to church almost daily, and when he was in New York, I wrote about it in my book, and it's still kind of like I didn't know about it when I was even writing the book. When I interviewed people, that he would go into church. He had a church, and he would help the church out. They had a senior home next to the church, and he would just help out at like Christmas, dishing out cake or helping the people get to their rooms. And he was just a very caring person. There was a guy that spoke we had a memorial service in New York, and I'm sitting with two buddies of Chris's from Edgewood in New York that lived in New York. He had two buddies, luckily, that from home that he was always with in New York. And we're sitting together, and this guy comes up. He looked like a bum, pretty much was. And he actually said, he goes, hey, I'm kind of homeless. And Chris found me once, and he helped me out, got me a place to stay, And then he went away to Hollywood, but every time he came back, he'd find me. I don't know how, but he'd look for me and he'd find me. Took me out to dinner, got me some clothes, gave me this Cubs hat that I'm wearing right now, and I'll never forget him. And my buddies, Chris's buddies, our friends from home, we're looking at each other. It's like, did you know about this? It's like, no, I never knew that. He changed this guy's life, and we had no clue.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He was, he's very inspiring to me even now.
And how he's remembered by everyone. Did you know Adam Sandler was going to do that tribute?
Yeah, he called us. Yeah, okay. He called my mom, actually. He said, I'm going to do this. And he had been doing that on the road, and my brothers Johnny and Kevin did a couple shows with him where he did that. And he sent us a clip, and it was like, wow, this is amazing. And we gave him a lot of pictures for the backdrop, family photos. But seeing him on SNL do that, the place where they met, and me living in New York, it was emotional for me because that's where I watched these two guys. I was there the first time they met each other. Yeah. And seeing him on that stage doing that was, it was amazing.
Just in the last year, that obviously went viral, and then, funny enough, his entrance to Letterman. That went viral as the best entrance ever to a talk show.
I'm in that, by the way.
Are you?
So it was at Letterman, and I was working at Citibank, and I came back in my suit and tie, all kind of Wall Streeted up. And Chris comes up to me and goes, got a great idea. This is going to be really funny. So you're going to be sitting down there, and I'm going to come running down, and I'm going to rough you up, and I'm going to pick you up, put you on my shoulders, run out the door, and throw you in. No, that wasn't me.
No,
he goes, I'm going to throw you in a dumpster. I'm like, no, you're not. You're absolutely not going to do that. He goes, no, come on, it'd be really funny. It's like, Chris, I will fight you, in the aisle at Letterman if you try to do that. He goes, oh, okay. So they got some intern. So when you see him running up,
I was going to say, that did not look like you.
No, but when you see him running up, the first person he grabs is me. I'm sitting right behind the guy. And he roughs me up. Then he grabs the guy in front of him and runs out. But I'm like, yeah, I'm your older brother. You're not doing that.
That's great.
But yeah, it's funny to see that, like, all of a sudden go viral.
All right, so let's get back to our topic on developed culture. That was a good segue, but or not segue, good off-topic conversation.
But I will, and getting back to it, when I do talk to companies, especially around here, people say, well, what do they know about Chris? And I say, he was what you saw. I mean, he was very much like that. And what I tell a lot of companies here is the reason he was so loved, he went out to New York in a very competitive, SNL was intensely competitive. And he went out to Hollywood, again, a very competitive world. And he's loved because he never forgot who he was. He was always Chris from Wisconsin. Yeah. And there's something about the Wisconsin DNA. When you look at guys like J.J. Watt, Jerry Kelly, Stricker, these guys have gone on to very competitive, roles, and they are loved. Jerry I grew up with, and so used to follow him around at golf. I used to do KPMG's golf events, and I'd see Jerry, and Jerry, everyone loves him on the tour because he's just this Wisconsin kid, and he never forgot his roots. And even Russell Wilson came here for 1 year, but he understood it so well. If you realize, he came in, everyone always talks about, he came into the locker room. He made a point of trying to figure out what this team and this school was all about. He got it, and that, a big part of his success. And I think that 1 year here, is a big part of his success to this day because he understood the Wisconsin DNA. We're just not like, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan. They're all Midwestern. There's all some similarities, but man, there's some about us. It's uncanny.
There's something different.
Yeah.
And it's always continued on that.
So I tell corporations, understand that and build that into your brand. Your brand isn't just your product, your people, and what you do. It's where you're doing it. You're a Wisconsin company. And you guys, I'm telling you guys this, you guys do this better than anyone, Northwestern Mutual. So I mean, you got
Yeah,
a long history
I
there.
just gave that look because I was like, Chad and I think we could do a better job.
You
of
can.
it.
You always can.
But
everyone know. It's Wisconsin company, man. It's
and there's a difference in doing business here, and just think about from a cost perspective versus a lot of our competitors are East Coast, Boston, New York City.
Yeah.
Just the cost of doing business is much more inexpensive and more effective here than it is out there.
Yeah.
If nothing else was different. So
it's a huge piece.
So have you seen a disconnect between companies' brand and what people are representing out in the community?
Well, it's funny. When I was a marketing director, in a lot of companies, and I've seen it play out a lot of times too, companies put a lot of time and effort and money into developing a brand, and for that, it's real the superficial level of what's our look, what's our feel, what's our logo look like, how our clients feel about us, how do they touch us, all that kind of stuff. And then they go to their employees and show them a PowerPoint of this is our new brand. And this is the most important audience you have. These are the people that are going out into your community to barbecues and stuff, and people go, oh, what do you do? And, well, according to the PowerPoint I saw of our new brand, this is what we do. That just doesn't work. And the disconnect is the one size fit all. Here's our brand. You've got to let people filter that through themselves. Employees, as I said before, everyone's got their own voice and their own style. And if you just say to somebody like, "Here's our brand, here's our vision, here's our mission statement. Go do that." People might be uncomfortable doing that if it doesn't relate to them. So, that 5-minute elevator speech that we're all told we got to develop as a company, that doesn't work because it's not true. It's not authentic because it's not filtered through the employee. And so when you get an employee that understands the brand as it relates to them and their job, they're going to be able to articulate that better than anybody. I spoke to hospice once, Grace, back when it was called hospice, and I explained that to him. It's like, look, you're not just this, hospice, and here's who we are. Here's our 5-minute elevator speech. You've got 3 distinct kind of employees. You've got, doctors and nurses that love being part of this healthcare continuum in Madison. We've got these 4 amazing, hospitals that in the small little town, but we've got amazing healthcare here. And just being a part of that group, some people just love that. Then you've got caregivers that are really passionate about this end-of-life care. Mm-hmm. That's all hospice means to them. They don't care about the whole Madison healthcare continuum. They just want to help these people. And then you might have this guy that just works in the coffee shop in the basement. And every day, I described it back then, I don't know if Doc Rock was the head of the doctors down there. He goes, every day Doc Rock comes in, asks me a question, how you doing? And I don't know what they do here. I'm just giving them coffee and a donut. But if this place has anything to do with that guy, that doctor that comes in every day and has a conversation with me, and then I kind of get what this place is about. 3 totally different people being able to describe what hospice is about in 3 totally different ways. Yeah. But I guarantee all 3 of them describe the brand pretty well.
Yeah. No, that's really good because I think as you were talking about that, I was thinking about Disney.
Yeah.
And from down to the custodial staff, they know their purpose to create that vision for us, the consumer, of what Disney is.
And I talked a little bit about this and talking about culture. I think some companies miss the boat because they think that providing happiness to your employees is what helps build a better culture and morale. Free snacks or this and that's not sustainable. And it's different for every employee. It's not about making employees happy. It's about allowing employees to understand meaning. Meaning is so much more important than happiness. And I'll give you an example: is if you look at parents. If you're just about making your kids happy, you're going to lose that battle eventually. But if you concentrate on why you're doing this, what's the meaning? Why am I a parent? Why are we creating? Why do we have this family? What's the meaning here? Because you're always going to have stress. You're always going to have difficulty. So trying to maintain happiness through stress and difficult times and whatever it is, injuries, things like that. Trying to maintain happiness through that's hard and it's impossible to achieve. But maintaining meaning, why are we doing this? That's far more important.
No, it's interesting. I took a page away from my dad, and this was, I don't know if your dad was like this, but he always would say, because I said so, if I'd ask why. And
Yeah.
I always hated that answer. Because as an ADD person, I'm trying to like walk away, do this, squirrel, whatever. But I'm like, and then I'd have this thought, I'd be like, hey, why am I raking leaves? Or just whatever chore he was trying to get me to do. And because I said so. So I always tell people, if they come into my office, you're never going to get that answer from me because I hated it so much. If you ask me why, I'm going to tell you exactly why. You may not like what I have to say.
Right.
It may not be what you want to hear, but it'll be what you need to hear. And I'll always give you a why because I hated that so much.
We all did. Absolutely.
But I think that was probably how they were raised. And so therefore they kind of perpetuated that down. Whereas I think now, my generation, your generation, the next generation, we've been taught to question authority a little bit more and ask why and try and understand it to get more fulfillment and meaning out of something.
Right. I mean, I heard somebody say once that, you got to be willing to sacrifice, a friendship with your kids to ensure that they have a fruitful, productive life later on. It's kind of like if all you do is make your kids happy, you're not setting them up for success at all. You're just trying to make them happy. Then they're gonna go off in life and be unhappy.
Yeah.
Because that's not sustainable. But if you sacrifice, you're gonna be upset with me, Junior. Sorry, but this is the way. This is what I need you to do. I need you to rake those leaves because it's it's a chore and it's gonna that's the explaining it beyond just because I told you so.
Yeah.
But that purpose, there's a purpose and meaning for it. There's a reason for that because you're building character and you're doing that.
Yeah, I was just thinking he could have told me, well, that was the reason I had kids, to help me do chores around the house.
I think my dad did tell me that. Yeah. Although we had 4 kids, and then he looked at what he created, and I remember when I got married, my wife goes, "Oh, you should probably mow the lawn." It's like, yeah, I really don't know how to do that. She says, "What do you mean? You didn't mow your lawn growing up?" It's like, no, my dad, we'd end up getting in fights. He wouldn't let us, he'd touch his beautiful lawn. It's like he was like, do something else, but stay away from my lawn. He just didn't trust us with those things. And seriously, like shoveling the front stoop, we end up, throwing snowballs at each other. It was just chaos.
I had 2 brothers as well. Yeah. Were you the oldest?
Oldest of the boys, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was the oldest as well. So yeah, I know exactly how that was. But half the time, so the middle one usually complied. I was the one that walked away, and the youngest got picked on by both of us. So,
yeah, Chris was the middle one. That was, he just marched to his own drummer. He just did what he wanted to do.
That's good. All right, so how should leaders be checking in on their people and understand? So we talked about meaning, talked about accepting. How should leaders understand, or even going back to that elevator pitch and making sure that they understand the meaning of the company going through, how should they be communicating and checking in on their people to make sure that they're happy and fulfilled they go out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I used to say, and I still do think there is one form of communication that is by far the greatest, and that's face-to-face. That will always be there. So, touching base, with your employees, in some way, shape, or form is huge. But now you've got millennials and stuff it's important to still do that, because otherwise we're going to grow employees, this millennial group that just doesn't know how to do that. It's almost like you got to teach them how to do face-to-face stuff. But I mean, there's so many other tools you can use. I love there's been a couple of companies I've worked for that the CEO is constantly throwing out emails to everyone, memos to everyone. I had my CEO at Bear Stearns was Ace Greenberg, was a legend. He was absolutely amazing in New York, and he sat on the trading floor. You could go down and talk to him anytime. He was total open book, and he would send out these memos. They actually wrote a book on these memos, and he wrote it in a different persona. I forget it was some really Jewish name. I forget it was a very Jewish firm. And it was Meishram, I forget who the guy's name, but he would send out these memos and really reinforced the culture and the meaning of why we do stuff. And one of those things, somebody asked me recently, what's the greatest tip you ever got from a mentor, or greatest advice? And I said it was a memo I read that went out to every employee at Bear Stearns, and it was about paper clips. And basically, this guy said, I've looked at we're not going to buy any more paper clips, because I see them on the copy machines, I see them on the floor, and we're wasting all the stuff on paper clips. And literally from that moment on, for the next 30 years of my career, I pick up paper clips everywhere. I mean, I'm like, put them in my pocket, because we got to, at Bear Stearns, we got to hoard them. We start hoarding paper clips, because you couldn't go to the closet and pick them up. So I mean, literally, I'm still picking up paper clips everywhere. And it taught me to be a steward of this company, even at the smallest level, saving paper clips and recycling paper clips. And so, I mean, that one little memo that he touched base on and told us why, and he created, it was the greatest advice I ever got. And it taught me, it was a small thing that made me look at the bigger picture.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Even my dad taught me coming into this business with Northwestern Mutual, and I think it might be a fable. I can't verify it, but I was always told in the home office, if you want to order paper clips or staples or whatever it may be, something that small, you have to pass it up the chain, because we're a mutual company, so that'd be spending policy owner money.
Sure.
Not stockholders. Like, this is a mutual company, so we're always stewards of that money. So I've always carried that story as it was true. It wasn't a memo, or it wasn't something that I directly saw, because I've never worked in the corporate office.
Part of the culture, though.
But it's part of the culture.
Yeah, and look at the big. Again, you're a steward, and if you're a steward with paper clips, you're going to be a steward of the bigger things too.
Yep.
I mean, it's part of your DNA of the company.
So that's good. So you talked a little bit about meaning. I want to make sure we cover that well enough. It's not about being happy. It's about finding meaning, and I think about fulfillment when you say that. So what is it about leadership that can help instill that versus just, hey, go create your own 5-minute elevator or 2-minute elevator speech? How can a leader ensure that meaning's getting through to their people so that they keep them around longer, they're happier, they're therefore treat their customer better?
Well, you got to walk the walk. I mean, you can't just. I mean, you got to be that. It all comes from the top. I think one thing, you got to model the behavior. It's got to be a part of your everything you do. But I think you really need to answer the questions of, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing this? What are our values? What did I just say? Why do we exist? What are our values, and what's our vision? Those are 3 things that I think you need to constantly. I mean, it's repetitive. You got to constantly. Repetition
is the mother of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's great. So that's perfect. All right, I know we're running out of time here, so I want to make sure we are respectful to your time. So let's do the word association game. Okay? I'm going to say one word.
Okay.
And you give me one word or a short phrase back. and you can't repeat yourself.
Okay.
Got it?
I think so.
So I say, so like, for example, I'd say Tom, and you'd
Schmom.
Yeah, you don't have to rhyme, but it could be.
I saw that some comic did that the other day. It was on some commercial. I was laughing my ass off.
All right, so you ready?
Yeah.
Comedy,
Chris.
family,
Humor.
uncomfortable,
Uncomfortable. Feelings.
Madison,
Passion.
leadership,
Driven.
trust,
Trust. Ultimate.
youth.
Wasted.
I think a lot of people would say that. Inspire,
Goal.
impact,
Impact. Purpose.
great. All right, favorite book.
Well, you don't ask a New York Times best-selling author what his favorite book is. He's gonna say it's his. It's. I would say. Two questions. My favorite book that I actually read it last summer that I loved was Patti Smith's Just Kids, and it was just Patti Smith talking about her coming growing up as a singer poet in New York during the punk scene, and it just was just very New York in the 70s. And I love New York, and I miss New York. So it was a great kind of like cool kind of book. But my book, The Chris Farley Show, I like that because, as I said, I wrote this book, and I didn't write it as these are my memoirs of Chris and biography of Chris. I interviewed people from growing up in Madison, people that knew him in Chicago or Marquette, out in SNL and out in Hollywood. And all these people kind of, had these little vignettes of Chris, and they all like painted this genuine picture of Chris, all these different people, and they all got Chris. They all understood him. And, I always had kind of a tough relationship with Chris growing up as the older brother trying to set an example, and Chris just not buying it at all. I really got to understand Chris, and I really understand. He wasn't trying to be, difficult with me. I think what his message was to me, his older brother, was like, Tom, you're this cliche trying to be this, Wall Street guy, this cocky Georgetown guy. Just be yourself. And it wasn't until I wrote the book and moved back to Wisconsin, my roots, that I realized that's what he was really trying to do. So writing this book about Chris, I developed a better relationship with him than I ever had when he was alive. And that's why I love my book.
That's awesome.
Because that alone is just because what it delivered back into our relationship.
That's awesome. So, real quick out of that, was there anyone that surprised you that you interviewed, that you either a story about Chris or just that you were like, wow, I really didn't know that or see that coming?
Well, there's one thing, I kind of let people kind of do their own, I didn't want to, counter anyone. I just kind of I yes-and it, It's like, if this is your memory of Chris, that's fine. And there was one particular story that Chris Rock told about the Chippendales skit.
Classic skit.
And he was really angry about it. Rock was really angry. He said, I if they made me do some, black skit, I would have told them to, jump off a pier. There's no way I was going to do that.
So Chris Rock was mad that
they made Chris do this, take his shirt off and do this. And, the reality of it is, I've seen Chris do that since we were this big. He was so willing to do anything to make a laugh. That just, you had to understand Chris. And when we were counselors up at summer camp, when we were in college, we all went up north to Minocqua, and we were counselors all summer long at summer camp on Trout Lake. And
they trusted the Farley boys?
They did, with young kids. Yeah, took them off into the woods and brought them all back. Yeah. But it's we'd go into town at night, and on our nights off, and there'd be bands playing this like little dive bar up north, and the band would go on break, and we'd all go to the bar and get refill, and all of a sudden we hear this hear this commotion. We look out, and there'd be Chris on the dance floor alone, with the piped-in music, with his shirt off, like slapping it on the ground and doing this whole dance, and just cracking us up, And so the Chippendales thing was like part of his whole shtick. I mean, he's always
that was in his DNA.
Yeah, it totally
natural
was. He but basically, being a big guy and having, body image, self-esteem issues. His whole theory was, I'm going to make a joke about myself before you do.
Yeah.
And mine's going to be 10 times funnier than you. And everyone's going to laugh, and I'm going to win. Yeah. And he did it. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the movie 8 Mile, Eminem in the rap battle. What are you going to say now?
Yeah. I mean, I used to see him down at the, we'd go to the KK at night. And
former employee.
Yeah, there you go. That was our little home away from home. But when all the four Farley brothers were in there, wow, it was crazy. I'd come into the bounce room and go, oh, and Tommy makes 4. It's like, they're all in there? Yeah, they're all in there. But I would see Chris walk up to like a booth full of sorority girls and start doing this, hey girls, where's the gym, kind of stuff. And there would always be like, some girls, there would always be one girl that just was not buying it. And, the natural, like somebody, you're not funny. Most of us would like, just get all defensive and just hop all over, like, criticizing the girl. Chris was like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I can to make this girl funny. Laugh. And he would like go down and do Rocky push-ups, one-handed push-ups. This huge guy doing these things, and he'd come up, it's like, what do you think? And then so finally the girl would just like start to smirk, and then I was like, all right, that's kind of funny. And then he'd be gone. Gotcha. It's like, I'm done here. And it was just, he would just go from booth to booth, just cracking people up.
That's great.
It's crazy.
All right, so how can our audience get in touch with you? Should they want to contact you for your work?
Probably the best is my moniker, if you will, is Mad Farley. Mad is short for Madison.
Yep.
Or crazy.
Or because you're mad.
Or crazy, yeah. Either way. madfarley@gmail is my email address, but you can find me on Instagram, Matt Farley, and Facebook.
Perfect.
So.
Well, really appreciate you being on the show today, Tom.
This was fun.
It's been fun. And I was thinking about it as the accepting piece of this. It's a lot like the podcast. If you're not listening on this, the show can go real bad real quick. Because if one of us isn't listening, we're not going to be able to engage on the microphone. And Chad's going to have to do a miracle job of editing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of editing, yes.
But I don't think we're going to have to today, so I think we're good.
How about Photoshop? Are you good with Photoshop? Oh, that's off.
No, you're doing good. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Follow us on Instagram as a reminder, @Josh Kosnick. And like it and subscribe on iTunes if you chose to like Tom today.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. All right. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a great week.
Awesome.